In a small cafe nestled in the heart of downtown, the serene atmosphere was abruptly shattered by a furious shout. A stranger, his eyes blazing like fire, stormed toward Barron Trump and unleashed a barrage of sharp accusations. Everyone froze, their breaths held as if time itself had stopped. The tension was palpable, suffocating the room like a thick fog. But in that exact moment, the young man's unexpected response left everyone in stunned silence, forcing them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the situation. What truly unfolded in that charged instant? Stay with us, for this story is not just surprising, but offers a perspective that might change the way you see the world. If you enjoy stories that touch the deepest corners of your heart, hit follow to ensure you don't miss a single one. Hinkias. And so the story begins. See, the peaceful atmosphere shattered with a sharp, cutting voice. Do you think you're better than everyone else? The cafe fell silent. Every gaze turned toward the man standing just a few feet from Barron Trump's table. He looked to be in his early 40s, his face weathered and strained, his eyes burning with intensity. His clothes, though not entirely tattered, bore the marks of long, hard years. His voice trembled with anger, his body taut as if ready to explode. Barron paused for a moment, not out of fear, but surprise. He hadn't expected such a serene afternoon to spiral into such palpable tension. You have everything without lifting a finger, the man bellowed, his voice breaking. Do you even know what it's like to struggle just to survive? The air in the cafe grew thick, heavy with unease. Customers exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. The barista hesitated, her hand hovering near the phone. Barron remained composed. Slowly, he closed the book in his hands, placed it on the table, and looked up at the man. Sir, he began, his voice calm and steady, I'm not sure what has upset you, but perhaps we can talk about this. The man let out a bitter laugh, dripping with scorn. Talk? What could you possibly say that I'd want to hear? The cafe was utterly silent. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the next move. But instead of responding with anger, Barron did something entirely unexpected. He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed yet attentive, and gestured to the empty chair across from him. Please, have a seat. The unexpected invitation caught the man off guard. For a moment, he froze, his clenched fists twitching as he stared at Barron. Why should I sit with someone like you? The man spat, his tone sharp and disdainful. You're just a spoiled kid who knows nothing about the real world. A few patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The barista seemed ready to intervene, but Barron remained calm. You might be right, Barron replied evenly. I've never lived through what you've endured, but if you sit down, maybe you could tell me about it. The man hesitated, his fists still clenched. Barron's tone wasn't defensive or condescending. It was an invitation. You think I owe you my story? The man growled, his words heavy with mockery. Barron met his gaze, unwavering. I think everyone has a story worth listening to. No. The words rang out like a bell in the still air. The man stood there, motionless, his face a mix of rage and internal conflict. Finally, he dragged the chair back, its legs screeching against the tiled floor, and sat down. Crossing his arms, he glared at Barron as though searching for a weakness. Fine, he muttered. You want to know what the real world is like? I'll tell you. The tension in the cafe shifted. It wasn't as stifling as before, but it remained charged. The barista slowly lowered her hand from the phone. Other patrons pretended to mind their own business, but couldn't help eavesdropping. Barron leaned slightly forward, his eyes focused on the man. I'm listening, he said softly. The man exhaled deeply, as though summoning every ounce of courage he had left. You look at me and think I'm just angry for no reason? You have no idea what it's like to lose everything. His voice dropped, carrying a weight of pain and bitterness. What followed wasn't just a story. It was a raw, unfiltered journey through grief and hardship. The cafe grew quiet once again, the low hum of the espresso machine, the only sound breaking the silence. The man's eyes drifted away, unfocused, as though lost in his memories. I once had a job, a family, a decent life. Then, the factory I worked at shut down. Just like that. Hundreds of us were left with promises of relocation. Promises that never came true. His voice cracked as he spoke, the tough exterior slowly unraveling with each word. I tried to hold it together for my wife and kids, taking any odd job I could find. But when you're living paycheck to paycheck, it doesn't take much for everything to fall apart. He paused, his eyes glistening. My wife, she left, taking the kids with her. She said she couldn't live like this anymore. Huh? He stopped speaking, his fingers unconsciously tracing the grain of the wooden table as if seeking a moment of peace. I can't blame her. Barron remained silent, his expression unreadable, but filled with unmistakable empathy. The man stared down at the table, his voice dropping to a near whisper, as though he was talking to himself. Do you know what it's like to walk into a room and feel the stares? To know everyone's judging you, thinking you're nothing but a failure? That's my life, every day. His words pierced the air, striking not only Barron, but everyone in the café. A woman at a nearby table glanced away, suddenly engrossed in her coffee, as though trying to process what she'd just heard. The man's tone rose, teetering on anger. And then I see people like you, sitting here in your fancy clothes, reading books like you don't have a care in the world. It makes me furious because no matter what I do, I'll never have what you have. The weight in the room was palpable, the air thick with the tension. Barron didn't rush to respond. He let the man's pain linger, giving it the space to breathe. Finally, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and spoke softly. I don't know what it feels like to be you, he said, but I do know what it feels like to be judged, to have people decide who you are before you've had the chance to say a word. The man looked up, his eyes filled with skepticism. What would you know about that? Barron drew a deep breath, his calm demeanor subtly easing the tension in the room. Sitting upright, he met the man's gaze. You think my life is easy because of my name. And yes, in some ways it is. I've never had to worry about where I'd sleep or where my next meal would come from. But that doesn't mean I don't understand what it feels like to be misunderstood. The man sneered, ready to interrupt, but Barron raised a hand, not to silence him, but as if to say, Hear me out. Everywhere I go, people judge me. They think they know who I am, what I stand for, what I've done, all because of my name. They don't see me as a person, only a symbol to project their frustrations onto. Just like what's happening here. The man froze, his expression shifting as though the words had struck a nerve. His arms, once tightly crossed, began to relax. I'm not saying my struggles are the same as yours, Barron continued. They're not. But pain is pain. Feeling ignored, feeling like you'll never be understood. That's something we all face, no matter where we come from. Red. The silence in the cafe was deafening, so profound that even the faint hum of the espresso machine seemed loud. The barista stood motionless, a tray of cups hovering in her hands. Barron leaned back, giving the man space to reflect. I'm not here to argue or change your mind, he said. I just want to understand because I believe everyone carries burdens that others can't see. And maybe, just maybe, we'd treat each other better if we understood that. The man clenched his jaw as if preparing for another outburst. But instead, he exhaled sharply, a weight seemingly lifting from his shoulders. Do you really believe that? He asked, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. Barron nodded. I do. And I think deep down you believe it too. If you didn't, you wouldn't have shared your story. The man blinked, the cracks in his hardened exterior deepening. He rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes darting around the room as if noticing, for the first time, how many people were watching. A flicker of self-consciousness crossed his face, but then he looked back at Barron. You're not what I thought, he admitted, his tone no longer combative. But what surprised everyone wasn't what the man said. It was what he did next. He leaned back in his chair, his defensive posture softening into a thoughtful slouch. The cafe was utterly silent. Finally, he spoke, his voice transformed, gentler than before. I walked in here, angry at the world. He shook his head, a trace of regret in his tone. Angry at people like you, people I thought had everything handed to them without effort. But maybe I've carried this anger for too long. Maybe it was never about you at all. Barron didn't rush to respond, letting the man sit with his thoughts. The cafe seemed suspended in time, the man's words hanging heavily in the air, leaving everyone deep in contemplation. When Barron finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady. I think it's easy to blame people we don't understand, but it's much harder to face what truly hurts us. Today you did that, and I respect you for it. The man looked up, his eyes meeting Barron's for the first time. There was no anger now, only exhaustion and a hint of gratitude. You're a good kid, he admitted, almost reluctantly, as though the words felt foreign on his tongue. I don't say that often. Ow! The shift in his tone seemed to lift the tension in the room. The barista smiled softly and returned to her work. A couple at a nearby table exchanged glances, their expressions now warmer, softer. Then the man did something unexpected. He reached across the table, extending his hand towards Barron. Barron hesitated for only a moment before grasping it firmly, a handshake that was both solid and sincere. I'm sorry, the man said, his voice thick with emotion, for judging you before I even knew you. Barron smiled, a bright, genuine expression that seemed to light up his entire face. And I'm sorry if I ever gave you a reason to feel that way. The handshake lingered a moment longer before the man released it. Rising to his feet, he adjusted his shirt awkwardly, glancing around the cafe. I think I owe everyone here an apology too, he said, his voice louder now, addressing the room. I walked in here full of anger, but this young man, he reminded me that sometimes all we need is to listen. A soft round of applause rippled through the cafe, gentle but sincere. The man nodded, his expression touched, then turned to leave. Before stepping out the door, he glanced back at Barron one last time. Thank you, he said simply, and then he was gone. What followed wasn't overly dramatic, but it left something profound in the hearts of everyone who had been in the cafe that day. It was a moment none of them would soon forget. As the door swung shut behind him, the cafe seemed to exhale collectively. Conversations resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. A quiet energy of connection and understanding had settled among the strangers who had witnessed something extraordinary. Barron leaned back in his chair, picked up his book, and sipped at his now cold tea. But before he could lose himself in the stillness, a woman from a nearby table approached him. She looked to be in her 60s, her eyes kind, her smile warm. Young man, she began softly, I just want to say what you did was remarkable. You didn't have to listen to him, but you did. And I think you reminded all of us that sometimes kindness is all it takes to change everything. Barron nodded humbly, his voice quiet but sincere. Thank you, ma'am. I think everyone just wants to be heard. She smiled, then returned to her table, leaving Barron with his thoughts. Around him, the cafe seemed alive with a new kind of energy. Customers exchanged smiles, started conversations, and even performed small acts of kindness, holding doors, sharing a laugh, or covering each other's bills. When Barron eventually left the cafe, the day felt brighter, not just for him, but for everyone who had been part of that fleeting yet transformative moment. The man's anger, Barron's compassion, and the simple act of listening had created a ripple effect of understanding and humanity. As Barron strolled down the sidewalk, he couldn't stop thinking about how small actions could spark meaningful change. He didn't know the man's full story, and maybe he never would. But in that cafe, in that brief moment, they had connected, and that connection had changed the room. Sometimes, Barron mused, all it takes is a little compassion to remind us that we're not so different after all. This story is a testament to the power of listening and compassion. Have you ever faced a situation where understanding was more important than judgment? Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else. If you found this story meaningful, share it with your friends and loved ones to spread the message of empathy and understanding. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to follow our channel so you won't miss the next heartwarming story. Let's work together to create a world where kindness is shared through even the smallest actions. Wishing you a day filled with energy and joy. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.